Hey everyone, welcome back to the live stream. Here we are going to be talking about mastering sprint planning in Jira. If you've ever tried to plan a sprint, if you've ever tried to essentially figure out how to use this amazing tool to plan and be the most effective in your sprint planning meeting, this is going to be the training for you. Let me pull up the chat here. If you are joining in for the live stream, please make sure you drop a thumbs up, introduce yourself, say hello. Let me know if this is the first time you're here or if you're a returning veteran. I'd love to know who's in the chat. I haven't quite figured out how to see who's there, who's not there. And so just drop a hello, drop a thumbs up, and thank you so much for tuning in. Now we're gonna have a lot of fun tonight. Have a lot of content to cover. Let me pull up my notes real quick. We are gonna be covering, talking about backlogs, talking about the sprint, giving you a lot of tips and tricks on how to get the most out of Jira and how to guide your team in the most ideal situation and the most appropriate way to plan your sprint based on what I know, based on how I've been doing it for the last 6 years, and based on the limitations of Jira. So Jira does have a couple limitations here and there that I want you to be aware of, so you can kind of know and get an appreciation for sprint planning. And so this is one of 4 events. Sprint planning is that very first catalyst, if you will, into the world of Agile, into the world of Scrum specifically. And so it's a pretty big, important meeting. It usually lasts anywhere between 1 to 4 hours. There's quite a few stakeholders involved, and there's a lot of conversations happening. And if you aren't careful, if you don't handle the narrative and kind of help guide the team and coach the team, it can get very chaotic. I've been in sprint planning meetings where it gets really, really crazy with just a bunch of people yelling left and right. So just wanted to, again, show you from a Jira perspective. We'll cover some Jira administrative things. But at the end here, or throughout this next hour, we are going to be learning how to maximize the tool, maximize the use of Jira to effectively plan a sprint. But before we get into that, let me just say a quick shout out to everybody that's on the chat here. Hisnick, thank you so much for joining. You're becoming a regular. Appreciate you. Jerry, thank you so much for coming. Yvette, thank you so much. Appreciate y'all coming in. Thank you so much. Appreciate the thumbs up. Appreciate the likes. Appreciate the hellos. And so without any more delay, let's jump into Jira and let's start covering a couple things. And we'll try to cover this from a beginners through like intermediate through like advanced. I'm trying to cover a wide variety of audience members here. And so if I'm going too fast, too slow, let me know in the chat. I'd be more than happy to adjust accordingly. Marion, hey, I got your request on LinkedIn today. So thank you for that, and thank you for tuning in today. So let's jump into, let's talk about the backlog first. We're gonna start there. We're gonna talk about what's the backlog, how you should be configuring your backlog, what can you do with your backlog, and things of that nature. So the very first thing is we're gonna start talking about the backlog, but talking about it from a Scrum perspective. When you're bored, you see here where I have board. When you have a board that is of the type Scrum, you're automatically going to get a backlog. Now, backlog is a beautiful thing because the way I like to describe the backlog is if you've ever had company come over to your house and you like very quickly like start shoving things into drawers and closets and just try to hide the mess, right? If you've ever done something like that, then you kind of should have an appreciation for your backlog. The backlog is just where everything goes that you and your team, mainly your team, has to work on. And so it's just like, it doesn't have to be organized at all, at least not all of it. Some of it should be. And so there's a lot of value in your backlog, but there can also be a lot of chaos in your backlog. And so we're gonna, over the next hour, kind of teach you how to balance it both out so that you can get the most value. Now, in a Scrum board, you will automatically get a backlog. If, however, for whatever reason, you are not on a Scrum board, and let's say you're on a Kanban board, you'll notice that I have a backlog here. And I wanted to show you out of the gate how to get the backlog enabled on a Kanban board, because the backlog is a very important thing. Even if you're not doing Scrum, there's still a lot of benefit to having a backlog for the reason of you just sometimes just want to shove things that you know your team has to worry about. You know that your team's going to have to worry and work on these issues at some point, but maybe just not right now. And so when that's the case, a Kanban board, if everything just shows up on your board, it can be very chaotic because you won't be able to find like the beginning of a thread. And so having these backlogs enabled is really, really key to kind of helping you get organized and kind of manage the chaos a little bit. So if you are in a Kanban board, I'm just going to come in here real quickly and show you how I typically get the backlog configured. So out of the box, your backlog status is going to be in your to-do column. This is only applicable if you're in a Kanban style board. Okay, this is not applicable if you're in a Scrum board. If you're in a Scrum board, we're gonna come back to you in a second, but you already have a backlog. So this is only for my folks that are in a Kanban style board, and they're like, hey, I kind of like this Kanban. I mean, this backlog idea. How do I get it enabled? I've been seeing the messages. There's usually a big old giant message across the top that says, hey, enable your Kanban backlog. You've probably seen this little message over here about your board getting full, and you're like, you're not quite sure what this is for. Let me show you how to enable your backlog. So you can see here on the left hand side, I have my roadmap, I have my Kanban board, but no backlog. So all you gotta do to enable it is drag your status. It does not have to be your backlog status. It can be any status you want, but I recommend the backlog status goes to the backlog. Makes sense. Bring that over to the left, and then you'll notice that instantaneously this got added on here. And so now we have a backlog in the Kanban board. And so now at this point, your Kanban board and your Scrum board are looking and feeling very, very similar. You're still not going to have sprints in Kanban. You're not going to have story points. But the concept of being able to be Scrum-like is now more evident in the Kanban board. Now, for the rest of this demonstration, we are going to stick in a Scrum project. So I am going to be essentially in one of my projects here that I have for Jira Scrum demonstration. I am going to be in a native Scrum type of board. So if you want to follow along, make sure you are in a similar type of board. And so the next couple of things are going to be very, very relevant. All right. So now that we kind of figured out what the backlogs are, how to enable them in the Kanban, let me talk about ranking. Ranking is very, very important as the next logical step. So what I'm going to do here from behind the scenes is I'm just going to send I have an active sprint. You know what? Let me just close my sprint out so that we just have a fresh, shoot, I did that wrong. I am going to have to redo this. And so I'm just going to have a fresh sprint where we don't have an active sprint yet. Okay. We are going to be focusing on the backlog. And so for this to work, the next logical step after you basically have a backlog enabled is you want to put stuff in your backlog. Now this could be anything that your team needs to work on. And so it doesn't matter if it's something you're going to work on like today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next quarter. Like as long as your team needs to work on it, your team should be encouraged to create stories, tasks, bugs as appropriate whenever needed. Now your product owner is typically like the person that's kind of defining at the forefront all of the major issues. But the team, your software developers, they're also going to have ideas. They're going to have discoveries. They're going to find typically bugs. And so there's going to be a lot of input coming into this backlog. Now, as a collective, as the entire Scrum team, but in a very tight partnership with your product owner, you should be grooming this backlog. And in order to groom it, in order to make sure that your backlog is always providing the highest level of value, you want to rank your backlog. Now, ranking is easier said than done. Out of the box, most boards are designed to rank. And let me show you what I mean by ranking. First, I'll show you a demonstration of it. Then I'm going to show you how to enable it. So rank in Jira, all it means is that Jira is going to remember the order of the backlog. And like, I don't want to say chronological order, but think about something like in chronological order. Like if you create something and then the next thing gets created and then the next thing, there's a list. There's like an order of operations. And Jira, out of the box, is going to do it in chronological order. So the first thing's at the top, the next item you hit create on, and they get tacked onto the bottom and so on and so forth. That's great if everything that your team is creating is in chronological order and the value is perceived to be chronological. But that's not the real world. That's not usually how teams organize. There's always a shift in priority, and sometimes you created something from like a month ago that's now important. Sometimes you're creating things on the spot that's now important. And so you got to be able to reorder these things around. And so in order to do that, you want to make sure that you can essentially move these things up and down. As you can see, I can drag and drop. Now this is essentially a rank. Now, in order for you to be able to do that, if Jira for some reason is giving you a hard time and not letting you do that, you can come over to the ellipses over here, go to board settings, and then under general, and you scroll all the way down, you'll see that there's using rank. Now, the only time that this thing will say not using rank is when your filter query up here does not have order by rank. If that word is missing, then your backlog won't be ranked. It'll probably be ordered in some other, maybe chronological by created date, right? Maybe it'll be by some due date or something. I don't know, whatever configurations your team have done. But if you have that and you don't have rank in there, your backlog will not be able to be ranked. And that could be problematic because now if there's a shift in priority or if something suddenly becomes more important, you can't violate that rank. And so you have to accept whatever order the issues are in. But if you add this order by rank, this becomes a very deep value with deep inside of Jira that essentially tracks which order every issue's in. And it'll remember it. So if you leave and come back, Jira is going to remember this. Now this is key. This is super critical. Being able to rank your backlog is super, super critical when you're working and negotiating with your product owners, with your development team, when you're trying to figure out, team, what's the most important thing that we should be working on now for this next sprint or this upcoming sprint. And it is super critical that you spend time organizing and grooming and refining your backlog, kicking things out that are no longer relevant, bringing in new problems that are relevant, bringing in new features that your customer wants, but most importantly, kicking things out that aren't relevant. I think not enough teams understand that there is value in essentially knowing and understanding and appreciating that sometimes some things just, they become obsolete and you don't need to worry about them. You don't have to carry this extra weight with you forever and ever. It is okay to let go of some things that just will never be worked on in the future, right? And so this backlog is essentially your place to reprioritize every single sprint. Now this is, again, very critical for you to understand and digest, especially if you're new to Scrum, because if you just accept your backlog for whatever order it's in, a couple of things are going to happen, because I've seen teams do this. I've seen teams where they don't groom their backlog and they just have a lot of issues in their backlog. And what will typically happen is they will go person to person, person by person, and then they'll be like, okay, so what are you going to be working on, right? And it becomes a very ad hoc in the moment. The developer kind of starts figuring out, okay, well, this is what I want to do. This is what I'd like to tackle. This is what I want to work on for the sprint. And now we're scrolling through the backlog and we're finding the issues that developer is going to be working on. And this is not the most ideal way of doing it. It's an okay way of doing it. I've seen many teams do it like this. But it's not the most ideal because you don't necessarily want the developers to be able to determine the priority. Because you got to remember that the whole purpose of the product that you're trying to deliver is that it reflects the voice of the customer. It reflects the priorities of the person that's basically putting money into your company's pocket, which is your customer, right? And so who knows your customer best but your product owner, because that's their job. Their job is to be that reason, that voice of the customer. So you want to make sure that you have the right person essentially influencing the order of the work that needs to get done. And so before we keep on going, I got a couple more people here in the chat, so I just want to throw some shout outs, some recognitions here. So Speak with Love always, thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate you coming in. Sandeep, thank you so much. Innovative Technology, thanks for doing this. Yes, thank you for coming. This is all for you. So thank you for coming and thank you for being a part of this. It's my once a week. Tell your friends and family if you guys don't know, but every single Tuesday. I think I've adjusted. I think I found the most ideal time. I think I was doing like 7 p.m. Pacific time. That's a little late for my East Coast folks. It's already 10 p.m. So I think that 6 p.m. is going to be the sweet spot where it's kind of late, but hopefully the kids are all down and you now have time to take an hour for yourself, to improve yourself, to learn something new, to get better, and to be here. So Sam, thank you for coming. Appreciate you coming in. All right. So let's jump back into the topic here. We're talking about rank, okay? And so one of the things that I want you to take away here is the rank is really critical. And so if you're not enabling your rank, go and do it. I just showed you how to do it. Come back to this video, look at that rank and make sure that it's enabled. Make sure you edit your filter query to make sure it's enabled. Once it's enabled, my next recommendation is you got to work with your product owner. And I'm saying this from like the voice of the Scrum Master, but essentially somebody that has some connection with the customer, with the end user of this, whatever you're building, that person should have some influence into the order of the backlog. And this is where Agile shines. This is where Agile really comes to play, because unlike a traditional like waterfall project where you have this plan and you go forth and execute, in Scrum, you have an opportunity to reflect, to look and say, well, here's what we did the last couple of weeks over the last sprint. What has changed? Has the customer, was there any significant feedback from the last product demo, this last sprint review, right? Is anything coming out of testing that is really going to be influencing the direction that we're going to go in? Do we have like a whole new requirement? Do we have a whole new customer, right? Has the market shifted? Are we entering a recession and all of a sudden things we thought were relevant are no longer relevant, right? And so this is the perfect opportunity during this grooming, during this right before you start your sprint planning, this grooming, this refinement session, to have these conversations with your team. And really at the top of your backlog, you want to have the things that are going to be the most relevant and value added work. You don't want to be working on some piece of work that is now going to be obsolete, that maybe is just something that is never going to come to fruition, and you just don't want to have your team invest these calories in these things that aren't going to be necessary. So this is why grooming your backlog is just so critical, and it has to happen before your sprint planning session, which is why I'm talking about it now, because in order for you to do the successful sprint planning that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes, you have to come in from with a good, like a prerequisite, right? And so it's just got to be, this is the first initial step zero, if you will, to having a successful sprint planning meeting, because your backlog makes sense. Your backlog provides you and presents you with the most valuable things up front. And that is just the key takeaway. I know I spent 15 minutes. Val, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you. Great to see you as well. Although I don't get to see you, but great to have you in the chat. Thank you so much. We got 14 people, so quite a few people. If you haven't dropped a like, please drop a like. I appreciate you. Also, this is a great time. Let me change this real quick. This is not supposed to go that way, but here's if you're in the chat, if you just want to kind of interact with the community in here, why don't you drop how many years of experience of Jira you have, your current role, your job, what you like getting out of these live streams that I'm doing. I call them office hours, which is really an opportunity for you to come and ask questions. And with that said, at any point, if you have any questions about anything Jira related, please let me know. I'd be more than happy reserve 10-15 minutes towards the end and try to address community questions. But I'll try to stay within the topic, but if somebody has a really good question, I'll be more than happy to kind of take a 5-minute break and go answer those questions. So if you have any questions and you just want to participate, be a little bit more active here in the chat, this is a great opportunity for you to learn and talk with other people that are in the similar journey as you. We got other people that are new at Jira, we got some experts in the room, and so ask your questions, say hello to everybody, network, go find each other on LinkedIn, become friends, and you just never know when a new opportunity is going to happen. So highly encourage all these communications to be happening in the chat while I'm talking over here. Anyways, so now that we have our backlog, it's groomed, everything's great. The next thing I want to talk about is a couple of tricks for grooming it, okay? Just so that you might not be aware, because you got the voice of the product owner. Your product owner is basically telling you, okay, so this is what needs to get done first. We want this first. We want this one over here. No, this shower curtains, we don't want them. We got these go to the back. And so that's essentially conversations that are happening, right? But you'll notice that there's some color happening on my backlog here. We have blue, yellow, purples. We also have these gray boxes over here. And you're probably thinking to yourself, Alex, what the heck's going on? What are these things? What are these dates? What is this none? Like, there's so much happening here that I want to just share with you why I have these and why I think it's a good idea for you to consider, for you to at least consider implementing or using some of these strategies in your backlog as well. So everything you see on here is not always all default. There are some things that I had to enable. I'll show you some of those in a few seconds. But for the most part, any time that you associate a story, whether it's a story, a task, or a bug, and it's associated to an epic, you're going to get a colorful item on the right-hand side. These colorful items correspond directly with the epic over here. So you can see this teal looking color belongs to this one. This yellow belongs over here. And these purple vanities belong over here. And there's like dark gray almost black, belongs over here to the install sync. So you can see that there's that correlation. This is key. This is one way of bucketizing all the stories you're going to be working on, because typically you want your team to be working on like-minded work. You don't want your team to just be all over the map. You want them to have like a north star, a direction, a common path forward that they should all be kind of walking towards. And you can really leverage epics in Jira to help your team establish a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, if you will. Because now, instead of just working on work for the sake of just being busy and earning a paycheck, they can associate the value, the why they're working on this toilet, install hardware for toilet, because they know that it's part of the current deliverable of installing the toilet. Now, if you are tuning in and you have no idea why there's all this bathroom stuff, I teach a class where it's a Jira class. This is like a paid class that I teach, and my project that we work on in class is to build bathrooms and kitchens and stuff. And so I try to make my stories things that are relevant to what the students all understand, because I have a range of like skills within my class. And so building an aircraft or building like an autonomous robot, which is my background, isn't always apropos for my students. So building a bathroom, I think everybody's kind of been through a home remodeling project, and almost everybody knows what a bathroom and the components of a bathroom look like. So that's why you're seeing a lot of bathroom and toilets and things of plumbing and things of that nature. So we're doing this thing here on just for that relevancy, okay? Anyways, I just want to throw that out there in case you're like scratching your hair, like, Alex, what the heck is going on? How is this agile, right? And so just we're a minor, we're building a toilet, we're building a bathroom, and it's all good. Anyways, so that's the epic. That's that first thing. The next thing that I want you to look at are these little gray sections, little rectangles over here. These are versions. These are releases in Jira. And so when you're releasing your increments, so this is kind of where we start now talking about not just the sprints, but when we start talking about the bigger, more strategic deliverable, which is usually called a release. Now, releases in Jira, really, really cool. We'll have separate conversations about releases in the future, but just know that if you're ever building anything, really anything that requires you to use Jira, right? You don't want to do like a big bang type of approach. You don't want to just like put everything out there, right? You typically want to do things in like manageable incremental chunks. Now, those incremental chunks start sounding a lot like a sprint, but a release is bigger than a sprint. A sprint is usually a small incremental chunk, while a release is like an aggregation of a couple of those sprints worth of work, okay? And so these could be like maybe a month, maybe a quarter, maybe half a year. They shouldn't be like more than a year long, because a lot of things can change in a year. But at the very least, I typically recommend my teams to be working on either monthly or quarterly releases. And these are usually the aggregated package, the full bow on top and wrapped up present that we then give to our customer, right? Because giving them just a sprint might not always make sense, because a sprint, the output of a sprint, right, it might just be pieces of the product, not the entire product. And so I can demonstrate pieces of my product to show progress, to show and get feedback. But overall, the customer at the end of the day, they want a working product. They don't want like, here's 5 things and like, it'll kind of work, maybe, hopefully, in the future, right? They don't want that. So you want to leverage releases to kind of get that organized, right? And so when you do utilize these releases and when you actually use them in your backlog, you will see that they show up here in the backlog, and you'll be able to essentially help, again, prioritize your backlog. So how does this work, right? So you can look at this and you go, okay, I got an item that's version 1.0. It's down here. Should it be down here when it's the current release we're working on? You're like, no, this is the current release. This should be the highest item. So we're going to move this to the top. And so we can go ahead and move that to the top. And essentially now that helps us prioritize, right? And then on that same note, we can go, okay, so we know that version 1.0 is the current release we're aspiring to. We know that 2.0 is going to be way, way out. We know 2.0 is out like at least 6 months. So we're like, look at this. We can just move this one to the bottom of the backlog and just kick that thing all the way out. This next major release ain't going to happen for a while, so let's move that all the way out. And now we're like, okay, so now we know 1.0 is a priority, but now look at this part. We know that this epic belongs to bug 2, right? And it's part of 1.0, So it might not be explicitly stated here, but there might be some logic in maybe grouping all these epics together. And maybe somebody, the Scrum Master, the product owner, maybe they forgot to add that it's version 1.0. And so this is a great opportunity during your grooming meeting, right? Not, you don't want to be doing this during your sprint planning, but this is a great opportunity for you to go, you know what? These should have been all grouped together. Somebody dropped the ball. Why don't we just like classify them right now on the spot? It only takes a second. And now look at this. Now you're able to control this narrative and you're able to tell a better story when you're looking at your backlog. Because now you have these epics that are all part of the same release. You have a bug, you have a story, you have a task, but these are all grouped and these all make sense. And now when your developers come in on Monday or whenever your sprint planning session is, now they're going to be able to look at this and go, okay, this makes sense. there's priority, there's logic, there's reason, there's purpose. There's like a strategy as to like, okay, so we're not just working on things for the sake of working on things. We're working on things that make sense. How do you create color coding and version encoders? Okay, so the color coding happens at the epic. You don't have to open the epics, but you can click on these little down arrows and you can just change it to, you don't have a lot of colors to choose from, but you can just click on that. And when you do that, and you have to hit refresh, it doesn't always happen instantaneously, but you'll notice that now my yellow ones went orange. So that's how you create the color coding for the thing. Now to create the releases, you do need to be a project level admin. You don't have to be full Jira admin, but you need to be able to see this project settings. If you cannot see this project settings down here, you will not be able to create a release. But the version and the release is also interchangeable. So they mean the exact same thing. And so assuming you're a project admin, you can come to releases and there's a blue create version button up here. You create like version 2.2 and then you put some dates and then you hit save. Okay. And now when you're ready to use it inside your issues, inside your backlog, you probably saw this, right? I clicked on one of them. You can come in, go to the fixed version. And then when you go in there, now that 2.2 becomes available to you, and you can essentially use that. So hopefully that answered that question. And again, if you at any point have any questions, keep them coming. These are great questions. But we are almost done with talking about grooming the backlog. Couple more things I want you to consider. Okay, one. So we talked about epics. We talked about the releases. Let's go look at two more things. Really three, but I really want to focus on two more things, and then we're gonna jump into really like planning the sprint. Okay, because. And the reason I'm taking a long time is if you do the investment, if you do this investment that I'm doing, right? I'm kind of eating my dog food here. But if you and your product owner, assuming you are the Scrum Master, right? But if your Scrum Masters and your product owners, if they're doing this correctly, if they're collaborating, the meeting of the minds, if you will, if they're getting together and they're having these conversations and they're having these exchanges and compromises and discussions and they're figuring this out and they're laying it out like this in Jira, right? They're leveraging this tool to tell the story, then the sprint planning session goes way easier. And I'll show you how easy it is when we get into it, right? And so the next thing that I want you to look at are priorities. So over here, you may have noticed that I have an up arrow, some down arrows. I call this the hamburger, right? And so you'll notice that you have these items over here. And so these are priorities. These represent the priority field in Jira. Now, you can change the priority field, but be warned that it changes it for everybody. So I'm going to show you real quickly how that gets changed. If you go to settings and you go to issues, I'm going to open this in a new tab. And on the far left hand side, you scroll all the way down to priorities. You will see that you have this priority section over here. Now this you must be a site admin. You can't just do this if you're just anybody. You must have the appropriate permissions in Jira to be able to change this. But this is where you change the colors, you change the icon, you reorder them. I personally, I'm not a huge fan of highest, high, medium, low, or lowest. I'm a big fan. I come from the military world, although I've never served, but I worked at Department of Defense style companies. So I'm a huge fan of major, critical, major, minor, and I forgot what the other one is, but critical, major, minor, and nuisance, I think, are the ones that they use. But that's how big of a fan I am that I can't even remember them. It's been like 3 years since I've been in a DoD type of environment, so bear with me. Almost everybody, though, they usually just take the highest, high, medium, low. So these are the priorities. I encourage you to leverage these. Now, priorities are really good from a business perspective. Your priorities should help tell the story from a business, from a customer-facing value. What is a priority to your customer, right? And so that way, when you're looking at these items, you can look at these three items. We have this bug, we have this story, and we have this task. They're all part of the same release. They're all part of the same epic, right? But we can look at the priorities that this one's high, this one's low, and this one's medium. And so for the folks in the chat, does it make sense now for me to shift my task up above that story and make it higher because the priority is higher, right? We've already determined that these items were designed to be at the top because they're part of the current release and they belong to the same epic, but now they're different priorities. So the priorities can help you within that grouping establish the order there. And so you want to leverage these priorities to, again, use this as like a data point. Use these as ways to just continuously control that narrative and not necessarily control in a bad way, but be able to describe the purpose, the why, to the developers as to, okay, this is the pecking order. This is what we need to get done. And in this order, at least for the next sprint, and because of these conversations that we've had. So leverage these priority fields to essentially be the most effective with at least the ordering at a micro scale, not at the macro. At the macro, you really want to leverage those epics, you want to leverage those releases, but at the micro scale, this is where the priorities really come in and shine and really help you out there. Now, the next thing we're gonna, and this is really the final thing, although I do have a second one, is you'll see plumbing and you'll see appliances. These represent your components. Now, this is not out of the box. This will not automatically show up. The versions, the epics, and the priorities are on the issue itself already. But this component over here, it is not. And so first, to create a component, you come over here to components and you add them, right? And so you can click on this create button and you add them. Now, very similar to that releases, you can only create components if you have the project admin power, which means you can see the project settings. If you can't see project settings, you won't be able to add releases and you won't be able to add components. But once your components are added, then all you got to do is open up your issue and then find the component. We're going to come down here, find it. Okay, here it is. And now we're going to associate it. So thing 2, that's going to be part of plumbing as well. Okay, and so now we have 2 plumbing items and an appliance. And this is okay because you may be asking yourself, Alex, well, shouldn't they all be the same thing? And not necessarily, right? Because it is possible for you to buy something that's in one system and then install other things, right? And so it really varies and it just kind of depends is the best answer. But the components, like unlike the epics where I told you all the epics should kind of hopefully match up and be the same, the components really just help tell you which part of the subsystem they belong to. So they don't always have to be aligned. They don't always have to be the same thing. They can vary. And since it's my 4th item of like as a data set, as a data point, I'm not as picky with respect to like, oh, well, they better all be the same or something like that, right? But at the very least, you should be looking at them. Now, to enable these, right, to be able to see them, you do need to come over here to the board settings. So you need to click on this ellipses over here on the right side. And when you do that, you go to board settings over here. And then we're going to come to card layout. Within card layout, you'll see that I have components. Now, if it wasn't there, if components was missing, you would come in and type in component, find it, click on it, and very critical, click add. If you don't do that, nothing takes effect. So once we have that there, you can go back to the board and then you'll see your components. Now you also seen this date over here. You might have seen from just my screen a couple seconds ago that there's also a due date. Now due date is a default field in Jira. You have to bring it into your project, but if you're not 100% Scrum, maybe you're in a Scrum fall, or maybe you're in those waterfall butt or Scrum butts. Yeah, Scrum butt. Where it's like you're Scrum, but you don't do it all the way. you only take the parts that are convenient to you. If you're in that situation and your team uses due dates, I encourage you to bring your due dates into this view as well, so that you can essentially leverage those due dates to establish, again, yet another data point for order of operations and order of priority. So if this issue is due before another one, you should send your resources to go and fix and work on that problem first before they go on and tackle other problems that are due a little bit later. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I know I'm talking a lot, guys, but feel free if things don't make sense, if you need me to repeat something, this is about you too, right? So in the chat, drop a like, drop your questions, tell me, Alex, stop, take a time out. You're going a little too fast. I have no idea what the heck you just said. Repeat that. This is, I know it's not, there's no voice involved here, but feel free to text these things into the chat. I am monitoring the chat. And so if at any point something is not clicking, let me know so I can back it up a little bit and help maybe describe it in a different way. So anyways, that, I know 33 minutes later, that concludes the grooming. And again, it is important, in my opinion, that you do this upfront investment, because watch how we're going to do our sprint planning next. Okay, the sprint planning at this point, it becomes a walk in the park. It's still a long conversation, and it's not that it's going to be a long conversation because you're disorganized, but it's going to be a long conversation because the majority of the meeting is not going to be focused on estimating. And that's fine. This is good. You want the conversation, the topic of a sprint planning meeting not to be like bickering over priorities and what should be done here, what's not relevant or things like that. You want the focus to be focused on like the complexity of the work, right? On who's going to do it, how they're going to get it done, what other subtasks need to be created and things like that to further decompose it and discuss like unknowns and things of that nature, right? Because at least now you know the marching order, which you at that point you don't have to like argue so much about it because you kind of have that North Star, but now you can assemble your plan to get to that North Star. All right, so here's Nick. I would actually benefit from the component part. If you could show me again, I would appreciate it. Okay, sure. So the components. The components are I don't think that I have to delete all of these to see the official description. But a component is a system of systems. Okay? So think of a car. All right? And so your car is, you have the automobile, which is the system, but inside of it, there's so much happening, right? You have the engine, you have a transmission, you have your braking system, right? The car's got to stop. So you have a propulsion system, you have a braking system, right? You have the, I think BMW has this, they call it, what does BMW call their cabin? The occupancy, the human occupancy system, right? There's the places where you sit, right? You have your instrument panel system. You have your HVAC system. You have all these different components that make a car come together. And so that's essentially what your component is, right? It's a breakdown from tangible. Okay, you can touch, you should be able to theoretically touch these, right? Tangible decompositions, not of the work, not of the tasks, but of the system that you're building, the product. So if you're building like an airplane, right? You would have the wings, the fuselage, the center, the nose, the tail, the landing gear, all the different parts that make up that system. These components during sprint planning are important, but to me, they're even more critical during like bug discovery. When you are adjudicating bugs, it is even more important for these components because not all bugs are created equal. And we will be talking about bugs much, much later in the year, but bugs can make or break your deliverable. And by leveraging components, and the way I've seen them actually utilized as like capabilities, right? Or really big features, really big deliverables, these components can really help you decompose your project, and you can use them to prioritize again the right work versus the work that needs to be done today versus the work that can be done like in a month versus the work that can be done like 6 months from now. Okay, just because you know which system has to happen first. Now, another example to just kind of take this point home is like if you're building a house, and I might have used this in class, if you're building a house, you wouldn't work on the roof without putting the foundation first, because there's got to be walls to hold the roof up, right? But you wouldn't know, because if you just look at nails and wood as like a story, then you don't know that these nails and woods are for the walls versus these are for the roof, because they might look exactly the same. But once you label them with the component, you're like, oh, these are for the roof system and these are for the wall system. The wall system should happen first. And so from that perspective, the components really help you out there. Hopefully that was clear. Let me know if it still wasn't. Marian, I think you're doing well. Thank you so much. Appreciate the feedback. It is getting a little warm in my room. I just need to figure out how to turn on my AC without distracting you all too much. So I do have my AC on, but apparently it's just not on enough. So I'm just gonna drop this temperature a little bit more and hopefully, and I also have all these lights gleaming on me. So not the best idea. Maybe I should do these like at 8 a.m. or something where it's a lot cooler. It's only 60 degrees at like 5 a.m. here in Southern California. So anyways, I think we're done then with backlog, and so we're ready to basically plan the sprint. So before you plan any sprint in Jira, you have to create the sprint. And so you're going to come over here and click on this create sprint button. Now, if you do not have the ability, like if this is grayed out, that means you don't have the permission. And so there is a permission in a company managed project. There is a permission here on the left that allows you to manage sprints. And so you need to make sure, well, maybe not you, but like your Scrum Master or your project manager, whoever, they need to make sure that if you're the person responsible for starting and stopping and creating the sprints, that you have this power. So if you don't ever have that ability, don't freak out. Just go ask somebody that has the right power and tell them to help you out. Anyways, so once you have that, you're gonna want to basically create your sprint. I already have a sprint here, and now I accidentally created 2. You can see that I have sprint 5 and sprint 2. Of course, I can share my screen. There we go. As this is just my 9:40 p.m. East Coast time. Are you still awake? Just challenging you, right? And so let me just do it again because all I did was click a button. So anyways, let me double one day I'm gonna have like the perfect screen where I do consistently share my screen and not talk about things that are not on my screen. Okay, so this create sprint button, if it's not blue, there's a permission. You don't need to know where it's at. Just know that there's a permission. Go talk to the right person. Have them give you the power. Once you have the right power, you will have this create sprint button. When you click on it, the sprint is made. Now, this part is very important because if you just go the way of Jira and you just kind of do things the way Jira is designed to be done, you're going to go and plan your sprint, and then you're going to go and fill out the details. It's kind of backwards. So first, fill out the details and then start your sprint, or plan your sprint, then start it. Right? And so to fill out your sprint, you're going to come, a couple of things you're going to do. You're going to come over here to dates. I believe that you should put the dates. Every sprint should have its dates because you should know when you are starting and stopping your sprint. Now, the defaults are 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. You shouldn't do anything over 4 weeks. 1 weeks are tough. 2 weeks, chef's kiss. 3 and 4, if you're in a software team, good luck. It's hard. So I recommend that you stay. We can't see your still can't see my screen. Are you sure? Anybody else not able to see my screen? Because you should all be able to see my screen now. Who cannot see my screen? Maybe your internet backed out. Can I get a screen check here? Because can anybody see my screen? It's his Nick. Am I still on the internet? I still see 11 people. So we still got people on the chat and everything's still going. So, okay. I'm going to assume y'all can see my screen until somebody tells me that you can't see my screen. But I'm going to try to be as descriptive as possible just in case you can't see my screen. But I have every reason to believe that you can see my screen. All right. So since I'm not seeing anything in the chat, I'm going to just continue. Okay, I see it. Great. Thank you, Wayne's World. Appreciate it. That's exactly what I was looking for. My heart always just stops for half a second, especially when I'm in front of a live studio audience here. So anyways, here we are. So 3 or 4 weeks, kind of tough. 1 week, really, really tough. 2 weeks, the most ideal length. So I'm just going to leave it at 2 weeks. And then I typically start my sprint on a Monday. So let me talk about this for a second here. So when should you start your sprints? Is it a Monday? Is it a Tuesday? Is it a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, right? Here's my 2 cents, and these are just my 2 cents, kind of taken for what they are. I love to start my sprints on a Monday. Okay? Now, the reason for that is that means that if you run a 2-week sprint, or any sprint really, but the reason is you're going to end on a Friday. And this is good and it's bad. Let me tell you the good, let me tell you the bad. But I love starting off with the good. So it is good because your developers finish on a Friday. Doesn't matter which Friday, but they're going to finish on a Friday. And that means that once you finish your review, once you finish your retrospective, you're done. There is nothing new. There are no priorities. There's no fire until you start your next sprint, which is not until Monday. So guess what? You get 2 days of actual weekend enjoyment and a time for you to just relax and just kick your feet up on your desk or your table or go home and sleep or whatever you want to do, spend time with your family, because there is no immediate threat until at least Monday. If you do your sprint any other day of the week, you're gonna have your sprint ceremony, your review, and your demo, your retrospective, all that good stuff, like on a Tuesday night, on a Tuesday. And then guess what? On Wednesday, you're right back at it, and you're like, "Well, Alex, we still have the weekends, duh." You're like, "No, because if your sprint ends on a Monday, guess what your developers are gonna be doing Saturday and Sunday? They're gonna be preparing for that end of that sprint all through the weekend." And every weekend they're going to be doing something like that. So from a behavior perspective, I recommend that you do the Mondays. But the only downfall to the Monday Friday thing is, guess how many U.S. holidays are typically on a Monday? A lot. So you're going to lose a lot of Mondays. But that's okay. All you got to do is cut your sprint a little bit shorter, shift it over one day, and then you'll be good to go, and just condense or compress your capacity, which we'll talk about here in a couple minutes. So I would say it's the reward of giving your team time off outweighs the fact that every once in a while, because let's face it, we don't have that many holidays in the U.S., but every once in a while, you're going to have to cut your sprint a little bit shorter, or move your sprint planning, right? And that's really the inconvenience. That you got to plan, your sprint planning was scheduled for a Monday because it's a recurring meeting. All of a sudden, every once in a while, you're going to have to move it to a Tuesday. So that's the only downfall there. Now, the other downfall is that it ends on a Friday. How many folks like to not work on Fridays? Me, right? And so whenever possible, most people try to take Fridays off. But if that's also the day of the retrospective and that's also the day of the review, well, your team's going to be missing out a lot on these very, very critical meetings. So adjust accordingly. But I still think that having just 2 days of that R&R, relax and I don't know what R&R stands for, but something relaxed. But right, having those 2 days outweighs the need, or outweighs your team's the need to not be there on a Friday, right? So, anyways, that's my 2 cents there. When you pick the 2 weeks, though, Jira is automatically gonna go find this other date, and it's just gonna go and set it up for you. Now, the time, you may see that there's a start time here at 6:41 p.m. and an end at 6:41 p.m. That is irrelevant. That doesn't really matter. You're just focused on the dates. Also, because when you complete the sprint, you can have a date here of August 8th, like it is here. But if I forget to hit the complete sprint button until like 6 months from now, it's gonna be open for 6 months. So this date doesn't like automatically close it. It just drives a countdown timer that you get to see in the sprint. And so I'll show you that later. But the other thing that you should be looking at here is your sprint goal. So this is where, now that you've had these meetings with your product owner, now that you've kind of back rest and relaxation. Thank you so much, Jerry. I knew it was something good. I just couldn't remember it for the life of me. Right, but now that you've had these grooming and refinement sessions, and you know the purpose of your sprint, guess what becomes a whole lot easier for you to fill out? Let me move myself out of here. Guess what becomes really easy, right? This sprint goal becomes basically very trivial at this point. It is super, super easy to fill it out because the thing we discussed in great detail last week, right? And so you just put that in there, and all of a sudden you have your magnificent sprint goal, which is your North Star for your team. Everybody knows exactly why we're here, what we're going to accomplish, what we should at least strive to accomplish. So you hit that button. Jira guy, you are a little late, but thanks for dropping by. It's the thought that counts, right? We still got another 15 minutes here to go, so you're not late, or at least you should still get some value. And we're actually just started talking about the topic. I spent the first like 40 minutes talking about grooming instead of sprint planning, but I think, and as I was telling everybody, that it's kind of important to do the grooming up front and get some of that discussions out of the way, so that when we come into the sprint planning meeting, it becomes a lot more fluid. All right, so with this, now we have our North Star, we have our dates, and we have an empty sprint. So now is the fun part. Now it's like, let's bring the items from the backlog, from the top of the backlog, the top of the backlog that we can trust, that we know is prioritized, that we know it's ranked, that we know that there's purpose to it, and all we gotta do is just right click and send them up, right? And so you just send these items up, and that's it. That is literally the act of sprint planning. Okay, at a basic. There's a couple of other things that we're going to be talking about that you should be considering. Okay, so first, and this one's outside of Jira, but one of the things that you should be doing after you set your as you're doing your dates, right? As you're figuring out, okay, how many dates are going to be in a sprint? When are we starting? When are we stopping? When you're having those conversations, it is very critical that you consider two things. One, holidays. I kind of talked about them, but guess what? If you're going to have a holiday in the middle of your sprint, right? Don't plan for 100% sprint capacity because whoops, sorry, not right now. Right? So don't plan for the whole sprint because guess what? You're not all gonna be there to do the work, especially because most people take time off during the holidays, right? And so you should converse and you should at least set the expectation that, look, team, during this next sprint, we expect a US holiday. And so we shouldn't expect any work to be done that day. And so our capacity, which we're going to talk about still, should be compressed to accommodate for that holiday. That's thing number one. Thing number two that you should be discussing is speak with love. Always, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, we'll keep watching the replay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it, Nicolene. Thank you again for coming and stopping by. All right, so yeah, so topic number two is PTO, time off, or any predictive like medical procedures or office appointments, right? Like doctor visits or something like that, right? If anything that your team can like anticipate, right? Vacations are usually anticipated because there's travel involved and there's hotels and people typically know when they're going to go on vacation. So if you're going to be, imagine if all these items were supposed to be for one individual on my team and that individual is only going to be there for 2 days in the sprint, we're setting ourselves up for failure, right? And these are the conversations that that you don't always like your product owner doesn't necessarily know or understand when you're grooming and refining your backlog. Because when you're grooming and refining, it's very much customer centric, right? It's what does a customer expect. But when you're coming into your sprint planning, now it's more intimate with the people that are actually going to do the work. And now you got to hear their side of the story a little bit. And so this is where you kind of have to play a good balancing game because, well, if the customer absolutely must have this critical feature, but the developer that is going to be working on it is going to be having surgery and they're out for like the next month, we have ourselves a situation, right? And so those are the things that you want to address. These are things that with a little bit of upfront planning, guess what? Using those releases we talked about earlier, right? Where you don't just work 2 weeks at a time, but you're looking at a month, maybe 3 months out. Now you can have these conversations and your developer's going to go, hey team, I noticed that y'all want me to work on something in like 4 weeks. Just FYI, I'm going to be out for a whole month. And so you might want to prioritize it for me to work on it now, or you may want to defer it until I come back. Or you may want to have somebody else work on it, right? And so those are all different conversations you can have, but you can't have them until you have the information, the data points to go look at. And so this is again why Jira is such an important tool that there's no other tool like it, right? And this is my favorite part of this tool, where you can have these conversations. Although I guess you could technically have these conversations with any other tool, but Jira is the best. I'm gonna just always stay on that train. Anyways, so you want to talk PTO and you want to talk vacations because now we're going to talk about what really should happen is once you've established that PTO and vacations, you have X amount of capacity for your sprint. If you have to compress it or expand it, maybe your team has been authorized for extended work week, right? Where you have overtime enabled, where your capacity is this much, but if your company is willing to pay for it, you get a little extra, right? So now you got to add more stuff. So you should always be looking at compressing or expanding your capacity so that this next part makes sense, because the next part is estimating. And this is where you're going to come into Jira and you're going to essentially put in points. Every story, task, or bug should have points. And so you're going to open up any item that doesn't have a point, which is this things 2 right here. You're going to come down to story points and you're just going to put points in. Okay. The numbers are very arbitrary for the topic of this discussion. They do mean something. Story points are very, very critical. They should absolutely mean something to you. I do have maybe 3 or 4 videos in my backlog of just videos that you should go watch that are all relevant to how to estimate. and I give you my 2 cents on how I do it. Because if we start talking about estimating right now, we're going to be talking for the next hour, and I don't want to do that. So for now, just for the purpose of this meeting, just put points in. Go watch the videos on estimating. And if you really, really have a lot of questions on it, let me know in the comments here, and maybe we dedicate an entire office hours just to estimating. But just for right now, just know that you want to put the points in here. Now, I will give you some guidance, some tips or tricks here, right? Now, this is kind of agnostic to your belief as to like how you estimate. But typically, a double-digit number, again, it's relative, but assume that you're using Fibonacci, assuming that you're doing 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, right? Assuming you're doing those, 13 is towards the other side of the scale, and you want to be very cautious of really, really big ticket items. Something that is a 13, like this bug here, it usually tells me that the developer is telling you that they have no idea what the heck they need to do, right? And they're hiding behind this number. And so I recommend that you decompose any story, any issue, any task or any story, task or bug that has a story point that are top heavy. I recommend you break them down into smaller items that then maybe you have a story to do research, an investigation, proof of concept, right? Where you can do things that are a little bit more manageable, tasks that are a little bit more bite-sized. Then your team can go get some more data points and then go and actually solve the problem, right? Because otherwise, if they just throw you a really, really big number, that just usually tells me I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm going to assume it's going to take me a really, really long time. And I'm just going to hope that it all comes together in the end. And guess what? Spoilers, it never does. So if you want to succeed here, break these items down. So break down, 13, 21, those numbers are big. If you're going over 21, holy moly, you are in a different category here. So I would take anything that's a 13, 21, I would start breaking these down. My ideal thing, this is just my rule of thumb, but no item, no task should take a developer more than a day or two to work. If it does, they should break it down into 2 or 3 1 to 2 day worth of work tasks, okay? Because any time that they're gonna take like a whole week, half a week, or have to spend the full sprint to do something, that's just bad news bears, because they just gotta go and investigate. There's just so many unknowns, and so you want to help the team. You want to coach them, right? Remember, you're the scrum master here. You want to coach them and guide them and tell them, okay, so let's take this scary mountain, this scary problem. How can we make it more manageable? And so they're like, well, it would be helpful if we went and did this, and then if we did that, and then with those two, then I can maybe prove a concept this. And they're like, great, here's 3 new stories for you, for you to be able to do. So let's see, Jira guys. I was wondering if we were about to fall into the estimation black hole of content. No, not yet. I'm going to hold my line, Jira guy. I talk Wayne's World. His thing says, do you recommend having 2 developers work on an issue that has a story point of 8 or above? So here's my thing with there's 2 ways of looking at this. From a accountability perspective, no, because one person should be responsible for one thing, right? But from a team perspective, and really from a pair programming, the sciences do favor pair programming, right? So if it is something hard, there could be a significant value in having 2 people working on an issue, just so they can bounce ideas, they can brainstorm easier, they can try things, they can iterate, right? And then so they're able to work. But you want to make sure that the people are compatible, that they're actually going to help each other, as opposed to add friction, right? Because if they're adding friction to the whole process, then nobody's going to win out of this. So that's kind of like, your mileage may vary, but I do believe there is value in having like pair programming. Just be careful, because it can really very quickly spiral out of control. Jira guy says, our rule of thumb on my first Scrum team is 13 is too big for one person to complete in a sprint. Yeah, so I freak out with 8s. So yeah, 13 and up, you definitely should be decomposing, especially if it's a bug that may hinder the work. Yeah, so typically bugs that may hinder the work. I've been in situations, right, where we've had a bug that took us almost a year to fix. So I'm not new to these things, right? But the key is in that decomposition. The key is in the understanding. And most people, you got to remember, most developers, highly paid, highly skilled engineers, that ego is really, really big. And most folks, they will, especially, it's just a character trait of an engineer, in my opinion, right? Again, don't come at me, but it's just again, my opinion of character traits of an engineer. Mileage may vary, but at least with what I've seen over my last 12-year career as and being an engineer, is I'm going to try to solve the problem to the best of my ability with as little help as possible, right? Mainly because I want to prove it to myself, mainly because I want to solve the problem myself, right? But again, it's very myself, ego, me type of situation. So as a scrum master or as a lead in a project, you got to kind of identify those situations and try to break them up and encourage them to delegate stuff out, to go ask for help, to get smaller tasking and stuff like that. So anyways, we are basically at the top of the hour here, so I want to wrap this one up here. But yeah, so good conversations here on the story point. So let's just kind of wrap up this story. So sprint planning. So a couple of tips that I want to give you. Once you have the points in here, down here you will see the total. So this is the capacity for the sprint based on what's actually being put in. You have to compare this number relative to the number you had discussed during your date setting up, right? Where you're like, hey, how many points can each developer take on? And you're like, well, 10 points each. We have 10 people, that's 100 points. So is this number representative of 100, right? And so if that number is too low, you can actually come over to insights here in the top right corner. And this number, this will tell you, based on the historical information, Jira is doing all this math for you, but based on that information, are you under, are you just right, or are you over? Very Goldilocks style of too hot, too cold, or too hot, too cold, or just right on the porridge. Jira is going to kind of help you understand. Now, the other thing you're seeing here is the issue type breakdown. Most of the time, you want to have a healthy dosage of bugs to features to technical debt. And you can kind of balance those out using these 3 issue types here. And so use these sprint insights. Jira does them for you automatically, offer free, and just use them as a guide to help you plan your sprint, to tweak it ever so subtly to get it just right. And then the last thing that you want to be looking at before you hit the start sprint button, I can't see it because the issues aren't assigned yet, but if you assign an issue to somebody, right, you will see this bubble, but you'll also see this ellipses here. You can click on this, and this is going to show you every person that's been assigned something, how many issues are assigned to them, and their total number of points. So the row will tell you their total number of points. The column will tell you the total for the whole team. And so you want to use this again, because what if somebody is like 50 points and another person has like 5? There's clearly a disbalance. And so you're going to want to have those conversations and rebalance things appropriately. So anyways, that's kind of it. Once all those things kind of check out and you got all your ducks in a row, and again, this went so much smoother because we invested so much time in that grooming and refinement session. But once this is there, all you got to do is click on the start sprint button. So once you do that, all this is already filled out. This timer will start, and you click on start, and you're off to the races. And that's pretty much it. So any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, any go backs? Thank you everybody who has tuned in. Excited to be here, excited to be doing these for everybody, and hopefully you got some value out of these. These are again, just day-to-day stuff. I have a couple videos where I do these very smaller, but never do I put them all in one video, right? So this is kind of like the point of these office hours, is for you to kind of collectively see the whole thing, the whole picture in an hour or less, or around an hour, and hopefully get some value out of these. So again, I'm going to open it up here in the chat, see if anybody has questions. I do have a Discord here. If anybody wants to join, the URL does change. I know Jira Guy and I are usually in there, the only ones in there. But if you want to get access to me, the Discord is going to be part of a bigger picture, right? And so what I'm creating in the future, just to kind of, as we're as we're getting to the end of July and we're starting to get to the end of summer, in the fall I am going to be launching a paid course. I'm going to be launching a paid course every month between now and the end of the year, and office hours, one-on-one time with me, cohort-based type of trainings. Those are all going to be things that I'm working on, and Discord is going to be a huge part of that. So if you want to get in early, get in basically when it's all still free. This is your opportunity to go over to Discord and start getting in that community, because things are getting serious here. YouTube is treating me pretty well. We're not there yet, so if anybody wants to do their part, if you guys look at their Ape Tech tutorials here, you'll see that we are at 914. And so thank you to everybody that has subscribed. Really, really appreciate you. Couldn't do this without all of you. And so you have no idea how much I appreciate everybody's support here. But if you haven't subscribed, or if you have coworkers or anybody that you know, heck, I always tell my students, your spouses, your kids, whoever you want, man. If you got 5 Gmails, log in with all of them. But I'm so close, I can taste 1,000. And then the next thing, just to kind of expose things to you guys, right? Channel's not monetized yet, but just to kind of show you where we're at, because you guys are the faithful few here. On the monetization side, we're at halfway point. We need 4,000 hours. So if you guys are in work or whatever you're doing, just watch the videos, listen to them. Don't listen to them, but just have them playing there and kind of just loop them up, or look at the playlist, or let the playlist go, or whatever. These watch hours, man, that's going to be my next series. Stay out of this. That's going to be my next focus here, to get that 4,000 hours. I'm halfway there. But yeah, you guys are all doing your part here, being part of this live stream. So do appreciate y'all coming in here. Again, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for all the great support that I've been seeing from this community. So I appreciate y'all coming in here and really encouraging me to figure this all out and put this content out there for you. So thank you to everybody. Sub twice, once on, yes, exactly. Thank you, Jira guy. Once on the personal, once on the perfect. So yeah, at that rate, we'll get to 1,000 in no time. So anyways, thank you to everybody. Appreciate you all, and I hope you enjoyed this one. We are going to be, if you guys wanna, I do have. Let me show you guys a teaser here, right? So I like showing you guys again. This is why you come to the live stream, right? This is why you stick to the end. So that you can kind of be part of this community. So here's a roadmap of the rest of the videos coming out for the rest of the summer. But next live stream, next office hours, all about workflows. So if you want to learn a little bit about workflows, we're gonna finally start getting into some deeper Jira administrative things, and then we're gonna kick it back into daily Scrum. So I'm gonna try to teeter-totter between admin and agile to kind of hit all my audience, because I'm pretty much 50-50, right? I got a lot of people that like it, follow me because of the agile stuff, and a lot of people that follow me because of the admin stuff. So trying to keep it balanced. But here's the next couple weeks worth of videos. So if you guys are interested, again, make sure you subscribe, make sure you drop a like, and you guys have no idea how much it means for everybody that just plays those videos, everybody that comments in the videos, right? It just helps the algorithm, helps everything out. And again, just appreciate it so much from the bottom of my heart. So thank you very much to everybody, and we're gonna end it here. So I will see you all next week. So thank you. Same time, 6 p.m. Eastern. No, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So don't miss out. Start blocking out your calendars. We're doing this for the rest of the summer. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Jira guy. Thank you, Jerry. Join the Discord. Hear this one more time if you got to see it. Thank you to everybody here that has joined. Appreciate you all, and I will see you all next week. Thanks. Bye.
I feel nauseous, believe me. Never had a lot of shit come easy. Had to work hard, struggle just to be me. Had to rise up just so they could see me. Did what I had to do just to feed me, and what was left over I put towards my dreaming. But the only thing in life that has meaning are the things you gotta work for, believe me. Take into your hands a plan, your own hands can land your own brand. And damn, I feel like no one takes accountability. They want the credibility, convincingly unwilling to put in the hours it takes to get some power. Don't be f***ing sour, take a cold shower. Scream until you're louder, work until you're prouder. And f*** all the doubters, they're just your downers. I swear to God they all let me down. I always fought just to wear the crown. I'm off at these fucking clowns who were all taught they deserve an ounce. It's only worth it if you work for it. It's only worth it if you work for it. I won't stop till they hear me now. I won't stop till I wear the crown.